one can be difficult, but good to see you all tonight. We want to have a time of prayer and then get wade into teaching, and we're glad you're here tonight. Remember, continue to pray for Glenn. He's been, he's still having rough weeks and days, so we're to pray for him that God will strengthen and encourage him and bless him. Pray for Jordan Ashby. That's Marissa's nephew. He's still in Bristol Hospital. He's had some repercussions from surgery. They take him back. And remember him? Remember Dale Fry? He last night, yesterday evening, they did a major biopsy on him that they will have the results from in 5 to 7 days. Past couple of days, he's been more alert. He's been more awake, but he's a very sick man. Very sick man. Pray for Donna. She's just about down herself in the state. She can't get much sleep at all. So remember them. Pray for Andy Clifton as he recovers from his hand surgery. Pray for Marcia Honaker as she continues to have therapy to try to get herself built back up. She was so low, it's going to take a while. Continue to pray for her. The students at school, of course, school's back full-fledged running now. Let's pray for our students, our teachers, our staff, for their safety, for a good year, for God's hand to be upon them. Also pray for Pat Harris. She just has got just a number of problems. She's a very, very sick lady, and she just really needs God's touch tonight, needs help. And there's so many problems that way. So remember her. Remember Shelby Johnson, as she continues to deal with some situations. Remember our nominating committee. We're trying to wrap up next week. So the work we're doing, and remember that. Next Wednesday night, this is a program note, that we'll have a short business meeting to adopt a financial report and also to elect our Sunday school worker. So the Sunday school workers can be ready to start the 1st of September. So that'll just be a short business meeting as we begin next Wednesday night. So remember that. Remember the lost in the church. We pray for these new converts, these new people that are joining. And God will lead and direct them, help them to grow, help them to get into the Word, mature, and to really grow in the faith. How many of you, we know that tonight, Wade's teaching, all this stuff is, Christian life is both an event and a process, isn't it? Being born again is an event, but being born again is also a process of then growing and developing in Christ. So let's pray for that. Our September, which is going to be here soon, looking forward to that. We're going to have our Sunday nights in September, not counting the first weekend of September. Of course, it's Labor Day weekend. We'll not be having Sunday night service in. But the last 4 Sunday nights in September, we'll be having our Grow training tapes. We're going to show up to everybody here in the auditorium. That'll be our evening service. Then we're going to relaunch Grow coming October. And just a lot of things coming up. Fall's a busy time. It's a good time. Almost a little hint of fall in the air this morning early. So, of course, some of you went up early, probably, sometime. But anyway, if you were up for 11 o'clock, you might have sensed a little chill, a slight chill in the air, but, otherwise, just forget it. I mean, there's not worry about it. But fall is coming, and so it's a lot of stuff going on. All right, pray for the Waits and teaches. By the way, Patsy and I will not be here Sunday morning. I'm preaching a homecoming over in Jonesville. Pray for us. We'll be traveling pretty early. We'll be back Sunday afternoon. Be back with you Sunday night. We're back on the hill Sunday night. Remember, having the theme Sunday night, food-wise, is breakfast. And so remember that. And some good things. Summer is getting on by. We got 2 more Sunday nights, so let's enjoy those. And this winter, when the snow was piling up, we'll think, well, boy, an evening up on the hill would be nice. All right, other prayer concerns that you have tonight? Yes, ma'am.
Let's pray for Brenda. She's still having a really hard time with this third chemo.
Yes, thank you for her. I messaged her today, and she was telling me that. And she's really having a rough time right now, and she said to tell you that she appreciates all your prayers and all that, your support and everything. She really does appreciate that, but she really needs our prayers tonight. She said the third treatment, and it's been, she said she's really feeling rough right now, so. Remember Jimmy? Of course, obviously, because he's right there, taking care of her, but, thank you for that, Mary. Talked to her, messaged her earlier today. All right, others?
Remember our sister Rita Lincoln, she's not feeling good at all.
Okay, Rick and Lincoln. Okay,
Pastor, remember our son Chris, his sugar yesterday was 510. And he went to the endocrinologist today and it was still 345. So she has started him on insulin. So remember him. Remember his wife Jennifer, she starts radiation. She's got 25 treatments of radiation before they can do surgery. They were to shrink the tumor before they tried to do.
okay, remember them both.
She was supposed to have a PET scan this evening, but the machine broke, so they didn't get to do it.
Okay,
And remember Becky and Sam, they're in Ohio, her mother has been pretty sick. I think she's got congestive heart failure.
okay,
And they went yesterday. I talked to them last night, and she said they actually had her setting up last night and with the oxygen, but the day before that, she wasn't good at
okay.
all.
Yeah, she has got some issues for sure. My mom, so remember that.
And remember Gerald Miller, he's a friend of ours, and had the shoulder surgery, and then he had neck surgery. And after he had this neck surgery, he's not able to do anything much for himself, and his sister's taking care of him. Remember both of them,
Yes.
they need the Lord.
Oh, yes, okay. Most serious thing, and remember the physical things too. Benita, I believe you had,
Yeah, my cousin Oakley Shelton, he lives in Oklahoma. He has prostate cancer, and he was starting radiation today, and he told me last night he's gonna have to do radiation for 6 months.
6 months, wow. A lot of radiation, okay, that's
Yeah.
Mary, okay, Michelle, okay, thank you. Others? Yes, Teresa.
My friend Liza Strawberry, they told us she doesn't have a lot of that. Okay, a lot of family in.
Okay, remember that. There's so many needs. All right, others? Unspoken, you want to signify all of our hearts, we have concern for Carrie, and thank God we can come to the throne of grace. I was reading that this week, Hebrews 4:16, where it says, let us come boldly to the throne of grace, that we may obtain mercy and find grace to help in time of need. And that, I know in our study before, you remember that in the time of need, actually is a part of that means just in time. God comes through just in time when you need Him, and when you have to have Him. So let's remember these today. Remember our lost friends. We often think about that. If you and I, as Christians, something happens to us, it's bad, but we know we got a future. We got a hope. But a lost person, if something happens to them, they can be in big trouble now and in the future and in eternity. So that's the biggest thing. So let's go to the Lord in prayer. And Mark, would you open us, please?
Heavenly Father, thank you for this day, Lord, an opportunity to gather in your house tonight, Lord, to worship you, Father God. Great to be with this service, Lord, and give way to the words that we need to hear, dear God. Father, this prayer list is lengthy. You know each and every need on the list, Lord. I pray that you'll touch them. Give them comfort and strength, Lord, and heal them where you see fit, dear God, that your will be done, Lord. Lord, Father, I pray for a church and all the things coming up, Lord. Got a busy schedule. Just pray that we have people involved and that we can do your work, Lord, and do something that will be pleasing to you, Father God. Lord, I thank you and praise you in Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen. Now, Wade won't do this, but what if Wade were some night just to pull out and do a pop quiz? And make us recite everything he's taught. Oh, Lord help us. Hey, he's a nice guy, he wouldn't do it. Boy.
Good evening.
Good evening.
what a difference one day can make. Well, I found that out yesterday.
Okay. You won't put on the gallows, were you?
No. This is good. Last night, we all went to see our oldest daughter, Samantha, who you all don't, well, some of you know, most of you probably don't. We went to see her receive her master's degree in nursing from King University. And then, as we're afterwards going out to the restaurant about to eat, she informed us that around the 1st of April, Karen and I will be grandparents. All right. Moving on.
That burst of excitement on your part.
I was speaking with a cousin last night, and I told him when I first texted him about it, he texted me back one of those spell check, got it right. Grandparent. Yeah, and I told him it's probably gonna take a while to sink in. Anyway.
I always want to see you so good at this.
All right. All right. Book of Esther. Last week we saw Haman enter the palace with the intention of asking the king to execute Mordecai. And before he can ask him, the king asked him how he should honor someone. And then Haman, thinking certainly it must be him, tells him that he should take one of the king's robes and put it on the person, put them on one of the king's horses, then have one of the noble princes lead them around the city square, proclaiming that this is how the king honors people. And he tells the king that. The king agrees with it, thinks that's a good idea, and then lets Haman know that it is Mordecai that he wants to honor. Haman's heart must have sunk. And he also tells Haman that he should be the person to lead him around. And he follows through with that command, although he must have hated every second of it. And then Haman went home, spills the beans to his wife and friends, and they kind of pronounce doom and gloom on him. Then he goes to the second banquet given by Esther. And the king asks Esther to tell him what it was that she wanted to request. And she tells him that she wants her life and the lives of her people. Haman is outed as the enemy of the Jews. And the king has Haman executed on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Now we're in chapter 8. Haman is dead, but there's still something left to be done, which is to try to do something about the decree that Haman had sent out. So let's start in chapter 8 of Esther, and we're going to read the first 8 verses. All right, this is what we find. It says, on that day, King Ahasuerus gave Queen Esther the house of Haman, the enemy of the Jews. And Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had told him how he was related to her. So the king took off his signet ring, which he had taken from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai, and Esther appointed Mordecai over the house of Haman. Now Esther spoke again to the king, fell down at his feet, and implored him with tears to counteract the evil of Haman the Agagite, and the scheme which he had devised against the Jews. And the king held out the golden scepter toward Esther. So Esther arose and stood before the king and said, if it pleases the king, and if I have found favor in his sight, and the thing seems right to the king, and I am pleasing in his eyes, let it be written to revoke the letters devised by Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, which he wrote to annihilate the Jews who are in all the king's provinces. For how can I endure to see the evil that will come to my people? Or how can I endure to see the destruction of my country? Then King Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther and Mordecai the Jew, Indeed, I have given Esther the house of Haman, and they have hanged him on the gallows because he tried to lay his hand on the Jews. You yourselves write a decree concerning the Jews, as you please, in the king's name, and seal it with the king's signet ring. For whatever is written in the king's name and sealed with the king's signet ring, no one can revoke. All right. There in verse 1, it starts out on that day. What day? Same day that all these other events have taken place, from Mordecai being honored to the banquet to Haman being executed. It's later on in that day. Now, we see that later that same day, what did the king give Esther? Haman's possessions. He gives the house of Haman, it says. That means all that belonged to Haman. He gives to Esther. His home, the possessions, the wealth, remember all the silver that he wanted to bribe the king with. All of that goes to Esther. Now we also see that Mordecai comes before the king. And Esther has informed the king that they are related. Now you remember how they were related. He raised her and he is her uncle. Yeah. All right. Now, interestingly enough, what does the king give Mordecai? Yeah, that signet ring. What's the significance of that? Either the ring or giving it to Mordecai. Authority? Yep. It basically means the position Haman had, he's got it now. With that signet ring, he can write any kind of decree he wants to and seal it with that ring, and it's law. It's as if the king had written it. Now, the ring, giving him the ring, should that surprise you in any way? What happened the last time he gave that ring away? Yeah, it brought about the mess that they're in now, trying to revoke a decree, which they can't do. They just have to try to counteract it. The previous time that he gave it away, it didn't work out too well. Now, Haman had been given a blank check with that ring, and now Mordecai is in the same position. He may be the queen's uncle, but I would have expected that he wait to see a little bit more about what kind of person Mordecai is before passing the ring along. Now, we also read that Esther appoints Mordecai to be the administrator or overseer of this estate of Haman that's just been given to her. Now, down to verse 3, the day before this, Esther had appeared before the king uninvited, risking her life to do it, to ask him to a banquet. And when she asked him then to another banquet the next day, there she was going to make her request known. And then her request was that her life and the lives of her people be spared. The king had acted, he executed Haman. But this was not all that needed to be done. Just killing Haman doesn't nullify the law, a decree. So what does Esther do?
Approaches him again.
Yeah, she appeals to the king to contradict, or counteract rather, the decree. Now, earlier that day when Haman had come home after honoring Mordecai, his wife and friends had prophetically told him that he would not prevail against Mordecai. What was the reason for that? Do you remember?
If he's a Jew, and she's a Jew,
Yeah, that was the reason, because he was a Jew. They had some knowledge of Jewish history, which their knowledge that the Jews had survived countless times when people had tried to annihilate them. Their knowledge of the Jews and how they've been preserved points to the promise made to Abraham back in Genesis chapter 12, when he said that when God told him that he would bless them who bless you and curse those who curse you. Now, Esther's appeal to the king, does she appeal on anything close to that kind of a basis? What does she say is going to happen to her if this goes through? Yeah, and how can I endure it? How can I endure it? She appeals to the king on the basis of how killing the Jews would affect her. That she would be sad and grief-stricken. Does it work? It does. The king reminded Esther and Mordecai of how he has, how Haman has been executed and his estate given to Esther because he tried to kill all the Jews. But as far as any decree to reverse or counteract Haman's decree, who gets to write that? Verses 7 and 8. Mordecai does. Does the king ask to review it before it goes out? He does. Had he done that before? He did. When Haman wrote it, he didn't ask to see it either. And he sent it out.
He wasn't, you know, the money, he was probably the best I want to do.
Yeah, some years have passed from the king that we saw in chapter 1. And if you remember in chapter 1, when Queen Vashti didn't respond as he commanded, he didn't immediately act. He had all these advisors come in, and he got their opinions on what he should do. But now we see him just kind of passing that authority on to let, in this case, Mordecai do pretty much whatever he feels he needs to do. All right, so let's pick up then in verse 9. And let's go to the end of the chapter.
What happened to Haman's wife when Mordecai took over? What happened to him, to her?
We're not told what happened to them. Now, it could be here later on they get taken care of. And by that I mean killed. We don't know.
I thought there was a tradition that went along, you know what I'm saying, back in those days, if there was something like that happened and they took over, what would happen to her?
Yeah, I don't know with Esther getting control of what he owned, if they put her out in the cold or what they did. So I don't know.
And sometimes when a queen was put out like that, then they become unstable. The king,
Who are you speaking of? You talk about Vashti or Haman's wife? Vashti, we're not told. It more than likely from that they believe that she did indeed become a concubine, just that went over to his harem, more or less. Yeah. All right. Let's pick up in verse 9 and go to the end. It says, so the king's scribes were called at that time in the 3rd month, which is the month of Sivan, on the 23rd day. And it was written, according to all that Mordecai commanded, to the Jews, the satraps, the governors, and the princes of the provinces from India to Ethiopia, 127 provinces in all, to every province in its own script, to every people in their own language, and to the Jews in their own script and language. And he wrote in the name of King Ahasuerus, sealed it with the king's signet ring, and sent letters by couriers on horseback, riding on royal horses bred from swift steeds. By these letters the king permitted the Jews, who were in every city, to gather together and protect their lives, to destroy, kill, and annihilate all the forces of any people or province that would assault them, both little children and women, and to plunder their possessions. On one day in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, a copy of the document was to be issued as a decree in every province and published for all people, so that the Jews would be ready on that day to avenge themselves on their enemies. The couriers who rode on royal horses went out, hastened and pressed on by the king's command, and the decree was issued in Shushan the citadel. So Mordecai went out from the presence of the king in royal apparel of blue and white, with a great crown of gold and a garment of fine linen and purple. And the city of Shushan rejoiced and was glad. The Jews had light and gladness, joy and honor. And in every province and city, wherever the king's command and decree came, the Jews had joy and gladness, a feast and a holiday. And many of the people of the land became Jews, because fear of the Jews fell upon them. All right, we see that the scribes are called in as Mordecai is writing his decree. Why couldn't he do it on his own? Could be that he couldn't read and write. Could also be with the various languages that are going into the various provinces. If he could read and write, he probably didn't know all the language. So he needed somebody else to come in and translate that. And also, they wanted to get the language of the decree just right, legal language, if you want to put it that way. So we read that the decrees are written, they're sent out, and I've read that the farthest province of the empire, it probably didn't take more than 3 or 4 weeks to get it out there. So they had time to get the decrees all passed out so that everybody would be aware of it. Now, this new decree that Mordecai has sent out, did it allow the Jews just to defend themselves? No. It doesn't mean that they could only defend themselves if they were attacked. I would assume they would do that anyway. But it doesn't just do that. It also allows them to avenge themselves. It's basically the decree that Mordecai has come up with is Haman's law in reverse. Just the Jews could not just defend themselves, but if they could go after the families of anybody who presented themselves to be an enemy of theirs. And they could not just attack them, but what about their possessions? They could take them. They could plunder them. Now, does Mordecai's law allow for the indiscriminate killing of non-Jews? It does. What if you have a Persian neighbor down the road that you don't get along with? Under Mordecai's law, on this 13th day of the month, yeah, you could kill them. And you could kill them under the excuse that they're my enemy. Now, what of, think there are any racist Jews out there? Oh, I'm sure there were. And if they harbor any racist feelings, they've just been given a license to take that out on anybody that is not a Jew. Now, doesn't the decree make it legal for the Jews to practice the same brutality that Haman's law did? Sure does.
And that's probably what happened to Haman's, one of his family, too,
Could be. It could be. Well, we know that we read about his sons here in a few minutes. Yes. All right. Here towards the end of the chapter, how do we find Mordecai? Yeah, he's decked out. This is a far cry from the Mordecai that was in sackcloth and ashes in mourning just a couple of days prior. Yeah. He is clothed like royalty. Now, what he had felt or got a little bit of a feeling of as Haman was leading him around the town square, he can really feel it now, that he's really decked out. Now, what was the mood of the capital city when Haman's law or decree had first been spread? Remember?
Great sorrow, grief.
Yeah, it was in sorrow. It was troubled about the news of Haman's decree. Now, what about this new decree out of joy? They rejoiced at Mordecai's decree, allowing the Jews to do this. Everywhere that the decree came to the Jews, they received it, it tells us, with joy. Now, interestingly, there in verse 17, what about the many non-Jews that hear the decree? They kind of quickly convert, don't they? Yeah. Do you think they really embraced the Jewish faith? Yeah, I think it's more out of fear that they did this. I don't think they actually, some may have, but I doubt that for the most part, they were just afraid of what might happen. So they want to blend in with the Jews rather than be seen as opposition to them. All right, so here we leave chapter 8. There's a feeling of elation and hope and optimism among the Jews in the Persian Empire. Now, let's move on to chapter 9. And when we get to chapter 9, about 8 or 9 months have passed from the time that Mordecai's decree goes out to now we're getting to that 12th month, 13th day. All right. Let's read the first 10 verses to begin. It says, now in the 12th month, that is the month of Adar, on the 13th day, the time came for the king's command and his decree to be executed. On the day that the enemies of the Jews had hoped to overpower them, the opposite occurred, and that the Jews themselves overpowered those who hated them. The Jews gathered together in their cities throughout all the provinces of King Ahasuerus to lay hands on those who sought their harm. And no one could withstand them, because fear of them fell upon all people. And all the officials of the provinces, the satraps, the governors, all those doing the king's work, helped the Jews, because the fear of Mordecai fell upon them. For Mordecai was great in the king's palace, and his fame spread throughout all the provinces. For this man Mordecai became increasingly prominent. Thus the Jews defeated all their enemies with the stroke of the sword, with slaughter and destruction, and did what they pleased with those who hated them. And in Shushan the citadel the Jews killed and destroyed 500 men. Also Parshandatha, Dalphon, Aspatha, Horatha, Adalia, Aradatha, Parmashta, Arasai, Aradai, and Vajazatha, the 10 sons of Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the enemy of the Jews, they killed, but they did not lay a hand on the plunder. All right.
Would you repeat those names?
Yeah. All right. Stumble through that. All right. The fateful day, 12th month, the 13th day, comes. The decree from Haman, was it still in effect? Yes. As well as Mordecai's decree. Everybody would have known about the 2 decrees that have gone out. And no doubt among many, there was some confusion about what in the world they should do, if anything, or just shut the doors and stay in the house that day. All right, did, some of the Jews, or some of the Persians rather, on that day, go ahead and attack the Jews? They did. Some did. What does that tell us about those Persians? Yeah, that tells us that there were racist thoughts among non-Jews, the Persians. They didn't want the Jews around. They had no problem going ahead and attacking. Were they successful in their attacks? No, they were not. Well, why were these Persians not successful? What does the Bible tell us there in verse 2?
Well, the Jews had prepared themselves. The
Yeah.
fear of Jews.
Yeah. The fear of the Jews follows upon them. And then the government officials, that's interesting, what did they do? They helped the Jews. Apparently this fear of the Jews also fell on the government officials, and they helped the Jews. Now, Mordecai is gaining in prominence. The officials in all of the provinces don't want in any way to be seen as opposing him. The Jews defeated all who hated them. In fact, verse 5 tells us they did what they pleased with those. In the capital city, how many Persians were killed that day? 500 were killed that day. Now, what about those 10 sons of Haman? What happened with them? They're killed as well. And we're going to hear a little bit more about them in a minute. And what did they do with the possessions of all these people that have been killed? They do anything with it? They didn't take it. They had been given the right to take it, but they refused to do that. Now, of these enemies of the Jews that they killed, of the 500, what about their families? Interestingly, it doesn't tell us. It doesn't tell us if the Jews not only killed them, but the men, but rather also went after their families. It doesn't tell us that.
If they didn't take the possessions, there must have been somebody there to continue farming or whatever.
Yeah, yeah, that would be true, yeah. All right.
Haman's possessions belong to Esther now, do they not?
Yes, yes, they do.
So the Jews went in and killed the men,
Yeah, if we assume this 500 is all men, yeah.
and left the families alone. Then, of course, they wouldn't take the possessions. Maybe, but
I thought verse 10 says that it's just those 10 sons. They did not take the possessions belonging to them.
Yeah, that's what it does. That's what it's implied. It says,
Yeah, yeah,
that's what it says.
yeah, and we're going to hear it again about the plan. On down here. All right.
so what I want to know, 1,000 men, I want to ask, how come they didn't kill the 500 Persians includes the families?
It could have, we're not really told. Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
but I would assume that.
All right. Now, to any people or nation that would attempt to annihilate the Jews, why do they always fail?
Because Genesis 12.
Yeah, do Jewish people, Abraham's descendants. All right, let's pick up in verse 11 and go down through 17. It says, on that day, the number of those who were killed in Shushan the citadel was brought to the king. And the king said to Queen Esther, the Jews have killed and destroyed 500 men in Shushan the citadel, the 10 sons of Haman. What have they done in the rest of the king's provinces? Now what is your petition? It shall be granted you. Or what is your further request? It shall be done. Then Esther said, if it pleases the king, let it be granted to the Jews who are in Shushan to do again tomorrow, according to today's decree. And let Haman's 10 sons be hanged on the gallows. So the king commanded this to be done. The decree was issued in Shushan, and they hanged Haman's 10 sons. And the Jews who were in Shushan gathered together again on the 14th day of the month of Adar and killed 300 men at Shushan, but they did not lay a hand on the plunder. The remainder of the Jews in the king's provinces gathered together and protected their lives, had rest from their enemies, and killed 75,000 of their enemies. But they did not lay a hand on the plunder. This was on the 13th day of the month of Adar, and on the 14th of the month they rested and made it a day of feasting and gladness. Now, when the king learns the number of that the Jews had killed there in the capital, what does he do with the news? Who does he pass it along to? To Esther. And he also asked her, is there anything else that you want? Well, did she want anything else? Yeah. She wanted two things. What was one thing she wanted? Do it again tomorrow. Today wasn't enough, let's do it again tomorrow. Why? Yeah, I guess she felt there were still some enemies of the Jews out there, so give us another day to take care of them. Well, why did she say make a decree and send it out across the empire to give everybody one more day to do this? Now granted, it would have taken a month or so to get the news out, but it's interesting that she's concerned with the capital city there and those enemies of the Jews there.
A little bit of her self-interest, perhaps.
Perhaps. Yeah, now that's one thing she wants. She makes another request too. What was the second thing she wanted? The 10 sons of Haman. I guess they have the bodies. I suppose she wanted the bodies hung for everybody to see. Because remember, Haman's still hanging there too. Yeah. Well, the king grants the request. So then what happened on the 14th day of the month there in the capital? 300 more are killed there in the capital. Now the Jews all over the empire, we're told, had killed 75,000 of their enemies. Now we're not told about any Jewish deaths, but I'm sure there would have been in the fighting. I don't believe that they would have come out of it without anybody being hurt. And all these possessions that they had a right to take, the Bible tells us, said it doesn't take. They didn't take. All right. Now, they didn't take. But what about Esther? Did she get any plunder? In a sense. She got everything Haman had, and she didn't refuse it. She sets her uncle up to manage it. Look over the overseer. All right. All over the empire, outside of the capital, what did the Jews do after all the killing is done? Celebrated.
Got a potluck dinner.
Yeah. They had a day of feasting and gladness. And that brings us to the feast or the celebration of Purim. Now let's read about that, picking up in verse 18 and going all the way to the end of the chapter. All right, it says, "But the Jews who were at Shushan assembled together on the 13th day, as well as on the 14th, and on the 15th of the month they rested and made it a day of feasting and gladness." Remember, the ones in the capital city had that extra day of killing, unlike the others. It says, "Therefore the Jews of the villages who dwelt in the unwalled towns celebrated the 14th day of the month of Adar with gladness and feasting as a holiday, and for sending presents to one another. And Mordecai wrote these things and sent letters to all the Jews, near and far, who were in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, to establish among them that they should celebrate yearly the 14th and 15th days of the month of Adar, as the days on which the Jews had rest from their enemies, as the month which was turned from sorrow to joy for them, and from mourning to a holiday, that they should make them days of feasting and joy, of sending presents to one another and gifts to the poor. So the Jews accepted the custom which they had begun, as Mordecai had written to them. Because Haman the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, the enemy of all the Jews, had plotted against the Jews to annihilate them, and had cast Pur, that is, the lot, to consume them and destroy them. But when Esther came before the king, he commanded by letter that this wicked plot, which Haman had devised against the Jews, should return on their own head, and that he and his son should be hanged on the gallows. So they called these days Purim, after the name Pur. Therefore, because of all the words of this letter, what they had seen concerning this matter, and what had happened to them, the Jews established and imposed it upon themselves and their descendants, and all who would join them, that without fail they should celebrate these 2 days every year, according to the written instructions, and according to the prescribed time, that these days should be remembered, and kept throughout every generation, every family, every province, and every city, that these days of Purim should not fail to be observed among the Jews, and that the memory of them should not perish among their descendants. Then Queen Esther, the daughter of Abihail, with Mordecai the Jew, wrote with full authority to confirm this second letter about Purim. And Mordecai sent letters to all the Jews, to the 127 provinces of the kingdom of Ahasuerus, with words of peace and truth, to confirm these days of Purim at their appointed time, as Mordecai the Jew and Queen Esther had prescribed for them, and as they had decreed for themselves and their descendants concerning matters of their fasting and lamenting. So the decree of Esther confirmed these matters of Purim, and it was written in the book. All right. The Jews within the capital city, they had their day of fasting, or of feasting rather, and gladness on the 15th day, because they had that extra day on the 14th that Esther had asked for to kill more of their enemies. They celebrated, it tells us, with gladness and feasting, and what else did they do? Gave gifts. They gave away presents. Now, the Jews have their celebration, their holiday, but what does Mordecai do about this? Is it just a one-time thing for him? Yeah. establishing the 14th and 15th day of the 12th month as a holiday to be celebrated, with feasting and joy and the giving of presents. Is that acceptable to all the Jews? Yes. They like the idea. Now, these 2 days are called Purim, after the name Pur, which means lot, which is what Haman had cast to determine the days, the 13th day of the 12th month, that in his original decree they were to be killed. Now, was this celebration to be passed down through the generations?
Yes.
Yes. And it has been. What I've read about it is that part of their celebration, they will gather together. Somebody will read the book of Esther. Every time the name of Mordecai is mentioned, everyone claps and cheers and shouts and that kind of thing. Every time the name of Haman is mentioned, everybody boos and hisses, and they have noisemakers that they clang around. Yeah, they spit, and the person reading the book of Esther cannot continue to read until everybody is quieted down. Now,
And they still not now.
yes, they still observe. Yeah, they do. Now, Esther and Mordecai together write a second letter about this celebration, and they send the letter to all the provinces. Verse 31 tells us they had decreed for themselves about this feast, this holiday. Verse 32 makes mention of the decree of Esther about this. Now, if the letter to observe this holiday is a decree, and what does that make it? A law. It became law in the Persian Empire for the Jews to observe this. Now, there are 3 things I want us to note about this celebration. I'm hesitant to call it a feast, even though that's what it's known as. And here's why. Was it established by God or by men?
No.
By men. The feasts, the 7 feasts that the Jews observe, like the Feast of Passover and Pentecost, Tabernacles and Trumpets, and I'm forgetting the other 3. First fruits. There's 2 more that I can't remember. Anyway, God established those. God established those and instructed them to observe them. Now, who instructs and decrees that they observe Torah? Esther and Mordecai did that. All right? Now, what were they celebrating with Torah? Yeah. Survival. Victory over their enemies. That's the celebration here. Well, whose victory? The Jews' victory? Yeah, there's no mention about it being God's victory over there. Now,
That's what I was saying about that. Why do they continue with this feast in the same way when it wasn't God?
It's like a national celebration. It's
Yeah.
like a national holiday.
I've heard it kind of compared to how we observe New Year's Eve and days. It's just a celebration, it's a time of celebration for them. Now, I want you to do something. Hold your finger there. Look back at Exodus chapter 14. Back in Exodus chapter 14, let's pick up in verse 30 and go to the 2nd verse of chapter 15. It reads, "So the Lord saved Israel that day out of the hand of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. Thus Israel saw the great work which the Lord had done in Egypt. So the people feared the Lord and believed the Lord and his servant Moses. Then Moses and the children of Israel sang this song to the Lord, and spoke, saying, I will sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. The horse and its rider he has thrown into the sea. The Lord is my strength and song, and he has become my salvation. He is my God, and I will praise him. My father's God, and I will exalt him. Now, as you're going back over, stop in Judges chapter 4. Judges 4. In Judges chapter 4, drop down to verse 23, and we'll go to the third verse of 5. All right, it says, So on that day God subdued Jabin king of Canaan in the presence of the children of Israel. And the hand of the children of Israel grew stronger and stronger against Jabin king of Canaan until they had destroyed Jabin king of Canaan. Then Deborah and Barak the son of Abinoam sang on that day, saying, When the leaders lead in Israel, when the people willingly offer themselves, bless the Lord. Hear, O kings, give ear, O princes. I, even I, will sing to the Lord. I will sing praise to the Lord God of Israel. Now, in an earlier time, the response of the Jews after God had given them a victory over their enemies, the resulting celebration was not a holiday, but worship. It was recognizing and praising God for the victory that he had given them over their enemies. Do we find anything like that here? We don't. All right. Chapter 10 of the book of Esther. We're almost nearly, but not quite hardly there. Chapter 10, let's read it, see how this book ends. And King Ahasuerus imposed tribute on the land and on the islands of the sea. Now all the acts of his power and his might and the account of the greatness of Mordecai, to which the king advanced him, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Media and Persia? For Mordecai the Jew was second to King Ahasuerus, and was great among the Jews and well received by the multitude of his brethren, seeking the good of his people and speaking peace to all his countrymen. All right. At that time, King Ahasuerus, or Xerxes, he was the most powerful man on earth. And yet, in the closing verses of this book, what are we told about? What does Ahasuerus do? He imposes a tax. That's what we're told about it, as this book closes. We're told that Mordecai was a great man. He's seen among the Jews that he sought to do good for his people, like a hero. It all sounds good, but is great in the eyes of men the same as great in the eyes of God? No. Mordecai was a great man, but we have no reason to assume that he was a godly man. He decreed a holiday celebrating a Jewish victory, and there's no credit given to God. All right, the book of Esther. The book of Esther records a great deliverance. But that deliverance came about through the providence of God, not the power of men. Now, as I've said a couple of times as we've gone through this, I've presented this book differently from the way I've heard it taught, and maybe the way you've heard it taught. But if we look at the book of Esther of the deliverance of the Jews in the Persian Empire. It speaks of the greatness of Esther and Mordecai. It introduces us to a new Jewish celebration, the Feast of Purim. Now, if these three things are of such great importance, that is the deliverance of the Jews, greatness of Esther and Mordecai, this new feast, if they are of such great importance, then why, in the book of Esther, in the rest of the Bible, you will find no mention of it? You will find no reference to a single verse of Esther in the entire Bible. The feast of Purim that Esther and Mordecai decreed that the Jews celebrate, there's no mention of it in the Bible of any other time it being celebrated. God is never mentioned in this book, the book of Esther. But reading the book, as we talked about last week, you can certainly see his hand at work, delivering his people, working out his plan. But it doesn't ever appear that Esther or Mordecai or any of the Jews, or even the Persians for that matter, ever saw it. And as I said prior, the book of Esther may be about people not with a strong faith, but with a lack of it. They're going through the motions, giving the appearance, when the faith really isn't there. But let's not leave the book of Esther being too hard on Mordecai and Esther and the Jews. But let's leave this book asking ourselves, are we like them? Do we see God at work in our lives or the lives of others? Do we even try to see God's hand at work in our lives or the lives of others? Do we want God to use us to advance his kingdom, or are we content where we are? Maybe we should leave the book of Esther asking what we should do to be the people that God has called us to be. All right, with that, I am finished with the book of Esther. Does anybody have any comments or anything?
That's just like a lot of people now, look what I can do. Me and you.
Yeah. That is society today. It's all about me.
And what's probably another thing we can learn is that they didn't give God the glory, but whatever they accomplished, we should.
Yes, we should. Should be quick to do that.
Would you give us those 10 names again? It's interesting, you quoted the Song of Moses, the Song of Deborah. It's interesting that, which was a song strictly of praise.
Right.
It's interesting, we mentioned, I think I mentioned a week ago, in Revelation 15, the tribulation saints, people who are saved in the tribulation, they sing that Song of Moses and of the Lamb. Which shows you that lives on not only in the earthly sense, but in the eternal sense. The song of praise to God, the great victory of overcoming the Egyptians, and that God did this great work. It's interesting that continues to live on and will live on in eternity, yet the man-made deeds are not.
Yeah.
You made a really good point.
All right. Anybody else have anything? If not, then let's state it and we'll be dismissed. Let's pray. Dear Lord, I thank you, Lord, for the blessing of another day. And Lord, I thank you for this study that we've gone through. Lord, I just pray that as we have gone through this book, Lord, may we look at ourselves, Lord. Are we the people that you've called us to be? Are we the person that you've called us to be, Lord? Lord, may we look to see you at work around us and not be content with just looking, Lord, but trying to join in to advance your kingdom. Now, Lord, I just pray now as we leave here, Lord, that you would be with us, Lord, that you would help us, Lord, to be the people you want us to be. Be with us, I pray, Lord. Keep us safe, I pray. In Jesus' name, amen. Still be in the Old Testament, I'm not sure.
Well, that covered a lot.
Can I remind people of But I